What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
This is San Francisco.
Welcome back to San Francisco, and thank you to everyone who made it to the first ever live podcast taping of this show in May. You all made dreams come true, namely mine. The space at Queer AF in the Castro was full up with people who have been through the podcast before, past guests, and everyone got to witness the conversation you are about to hear on Trans Black-Palestinian Solidarities between Jemma DeCristo, LaVelle Ridley, and Mama Ganuush and I. And the topic, Trans Black-Palestinian Solidarities, given the gravity of the topic and where we're at right now with the genocide, I think it was natural that some tears were shed, both from behind the microphone and in the audience. Before we hit play on that, thank you to Tofu. We finally got to meet in person for the first time. For catching everything on video, also thank you to Zach and Devlin at Queer AF. And thank you to my friends at Gay Shame and Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism for coming through and tabling. The ideas behind the best episodes of this podcast are probably the results of conversations with people in one of these organizing collectives. And also thank you to dream makers named Jade, Carl Russo, and of course, Thatcher. Thanks for subscribing to the Patreon, which helps cover the editing of this show and also goes to some of the tech that is required to keep the podcast going. If you happen to be interested in joining them, you can go to patreon.com/San Francisco, where you'll also find our past episodes and show notes. And if you didn't make it to the live show, there is a good chance that we will do it again. And here is what you missed. So today is about Trans Black-Palestinian Solidarities. Very stoked to host this conversation, which felt like a natural one to be having right now, since we're in the midst of a genocide going on that the U.S. is very much playing a part in. And we also have a movement that I think has largely been led, and in many cases, like the people at the front of like so many movements are trans, are Black, are Palestinian. So got together some people who might be able to offer some words on why that is, why are trans people so often at the front of a lot of these movements for liberation, was actually my first question.
I think this will also anticipate one of your other questions. For me, all of the Palestinian people I know are queer and trans. So I don't think I know a straight Palestinian. I don't really know any straight people. But so I think there's also, I think some of it is kind of a mutual interest in a shared project of liberation or projects of liberation. I would have, there's general answers I would have to that too. I think a lot of trans people know what it's like to be intensely oppressed and regulated as a social group. And I think there's a lot of obvious parallels and overlaps. Of course, as I mentioned, there's a lot of trans and queer Palestinians that I know. So I think there's a shared recognition of mutual suffering, which of course overlaps. And then there's a long history, because this was a local podcast, of trans and queer, especially unhoused people in the Bay, being brutalized, harassed, killed by police, which of course, as many of us have learned during this time, are lovely local stormtroopers, a lovely local occupying military, the San Francisco Police Department, as well as other police departments in the United States train with the IOF. And so there's kind of a shared oppressor in a direct sense, as well as some lovely, horrible Zionist politicians, local politicians we'll probably talk about a little bit later.
Okay. Yeah, to build on that, I think that really emphasizing the importance of understanding the kind of coalitions that can come out of having a common enemy, especially an identifiable network of common enemies, is really, really important. So I think that the most significant aspects of Black Trans Palestinian Solidarity that I've noticed. And then also for me, as a scholar and an organizer and a writer, I'm really guided by Black feminist politics, period, but particularly a coalitional politic around being able to see how all these things connect and being able to understand that one's particular liberation is dependent on everyone's liberation. So, under that kind of rubric, it seems really easy, to understand us as all fighting under a similar cause with similar oppressors that are working towards our destruction together. So, all the more reason for us to be in solidarity,
I would plus to all of this, as a Palestinian trans person, it's also because I am being weaponized all the time for genocide. And that's one of the things that I feel as a trans Palestinian person. It's my responsibility or my duty. I'm actually not responsible to address fascism or to address somebody weaponizing me. But if I have the energy and the life, my duty is to make sure that this is addressed. This is not, fascism cannot be weaponized by trans people. So that's one of the things as a Palestinian trans person. This is important. We have to show up. Even if we can't, we have to. And that's part of our, unfortunately, heritage as Palestinians. At least that's how I feel. And the other thing is, as trans people, I agree with you. We are apartheid in our own bodies. And I feel like apartheid is extremely relevant because this is the same idea that you are an apartheid in your own body. You're not allowed by the system, you're not allowed by the society, and you're not seen or acknowledged, and you're always oppressed. And you don't have the rights and you don't have freedom to do things whatever the fuck you want to do with your body and your gender. And I feel like that's one of the things that this apartheid in your own body makes you understand what does it mean to be apartheid in your own country, in your own homeland, and you're not recognized for your indigenous rights and who you are as a human being. So I feel like these are two things that, for me, resonate very much. And the third thing is that Black communities are the first to show up for Palestinians, period, in this country. From even Black heroes like Malcolm X and Dr. King and other heroes that came out and were supportive of Palestine and talking about the apartheid when nobody did, from Black Panthers training Palestinian resistance fighters in Africa for a continuous standing up. South Africa is the only nation in this world that stood up for Palestinians. So that's a history of not just a history of oppression, but a history of solidarity. Black people always showed up for Palestinians, whether they are trans or straight. And I feel like, unfortunately, now we are in this situation together, and we have to continue the solidarity until we're all liberated.
One of the things that, even though the past 7 months have been a pretty dark 7 months, there has been some light for me in some of the relationships that have strengthened or have been created out of that darkness. Like with Mama Ganuush, who I first set eyes on when she was behind a megaphone out there at Castro on 18th. When we were doing a die-in early on in the most recent stage of the genocide. But that's something that I wanted to ask about, the solidarity and the resistance to the oppression, and specifically, for each of you, what's been a moment or an action that you felt was particularly inspiring or maybe creative, unexpected. From the past 6 or 7 months, has there been one that's stood out to you?
Well, you already mentioned the two groups. I think in particular, Quit and Gishin put on a Queers for Palestine action, march, and that's where many of us really for met again. And I think that was pretty special because it was very centered around, to jump off of what Mama Ganuush was saying, countering the narrative, the pinkwashing narrative, which I'm sure we'll talk about, that the U.S. or, the entity that occupies 48 are liberal. Well, I mean, they are liberal. I think that's actually what liberalism is. But they're accepting pro-trans, pro-queer, we'll speak very simplistically, entities or projects. And one of the things that I felt really was meaningful about the multiple events that were put on that were Queers for Palestine was that it was a way to counter this sort of pinkwashing narrative where we are used as props, as like extremely minoritized people in this ironically overly representative economy where, like all the flags that are in this neighborhood, we're in the Castro, people don't know from the broadcast. So the way in which I think you really put it well, sort of weaponized as these forces of neoliberal imperialism is something that it felt like we could really counter in that moment. And there was also the first one, if I remember correctly, we kind of linked up with the general march. So it's like when you go to a family reunion and you're like, oh, straight people again, or something. And it was very fun to maybe code switch or something, but it was kind of fun to have it wasn't a little space, it was like half what ended up being the general pro-Palestine march. So that was one thing I really liked, and there's some others we could talk about.
For me, I would say, I think same, like the particular disruption of our very gay, very queer pro-Palestine action here a couple months ago was a particularly formative moment for me. Particularly happy you brought up pinkwashing too, Jemma, because for me the most significant thing that I experienced that happened to me was having people, very queer, cis people coming up and being hurling the very routine thing that people say, which is horrible, of they would do X, Y, or Z, whatever.
Throw you off a roof there.
Over there. Yeah. Well, you don't know what they do to you. Yeah, but you're trying to, speak up for them. Right. No, exactly. Our queer utopia here, where trans people are magically safe and employed and whatnot.
Right.
But yeah. But I never have I had people say that so many times to me, and without any hint of irony of just yelling it at me. Of course, they were mostly all white, of course, and it was just really, it was an interesting moment to really see, I really understood, in myself as someone who's, always learning and thinking about, abolition and what does it mean to want to desire a world where we're not oppressed in these really fucked up ways, it was really good practice almost to kind of, to be confronted by that and to really be able to identify, this is what it looks like, and this is gonna help us be able to identify who we're fighting against and why, and help us get that nuance that we need to get to where we actually want to go. So moments like that, and then moments like this too, where people can come together and learn and dialogue and all that, I think is just really important in general. So people have to come into those spaces, be willing to listen and learn and actually be a part of the process, and yeah.
I feel like that was a moment. The Castro protest with Gay Shame and Quit, and a lot of other things. A lot of people came out to this, and it was organized by these two. I've never realized that it was very freeing to me, because it's very hard for me to explain to people when I go to gay bars what does it mean to be Palestinian, and why I'm irritated that this person just came back from a claiming birth trip, whatever, Sadaira. And it's the first time you're in the middle of the Castro, which is represented by Zionists. It's just in our system, whether on a state level or on a federal level or even at a local level, literally every single person representing this specific neighborhood is a Zionist. And all the way to the federal level. And then there's people coming out from Palestine. I have to explain to them that I don't have to try to find a Palestinian or some Arab or, you know what I mean, or is someone just going to understand, an Armenian person like in the back. I was like, oh, you got me, you know what I mean? I found a lot of people that actually kind of do that, and I was like, this is incredible for me. And also the other thing that was very inspiring for me is as Palestinians, it's a coming out when you say you're Palestinian in this country or in Egypt. In most diasporas, it's a coming out process. It's like harder to say that you're Palestinian than you're queer. And that's just my experience when I worked in San Francisco. And now I feel like I am known as the Palestinian person. And that for me was extremely important. And that's because of these queer communities that showed up and Jewish communities and Black, everybody showed up for Palestine. And that was the beginning of it. And I remember I was in desperation that day. And because I had a meeting with Raphael Mendelin right before this, and I was crying. I was telling him I have 176 people that were killed in my family, and he looked at my face and was like, "I'm here to listen. I'm not here to discuss. I am a Zionist. I have family in Israel, and I care about only the Jewish and also like the local people needs." And half of the room were Jewish people who are anti-war at that time, and some of them were even Zionist. Not just anti-Zionist, and people were speaking to him, and he didn't see me. There was so much racism. Like he only looked at the Jewish people who are white like him, and he spoke to them as if this is the people that he wants to talk to. And that made me so depressed and extremely humiliated, because I cried first of all, which I didn't want to do that. And the second one is that I tried to butter him up, because I was like, oh, I have a moment where I could say something, even if I don't think it, just to make sure that my people are protected, because I don't want more of them dead. And I felt like I had to compromise for a minute for somebody who's a racist, deeply fascist human being like this. So when I came out of this, that was happening literally a few days after was this gay shade protest, and I was like such a relief. Like it was such a relief. And everybody that I saw there is queer or trans, including like the Pups for Palestine, first of all, like something ceasefire now. I was like, this is
That kind of brings us into the next question that I had, which has been a part of a bunch of recent episodes of the podcast. Pinkwashing, other forms of washing. We just did an episode with Dylan Rodriguez that you can listen to about the use of anti-Asian hate by Zionism and co-optation of anti-Asian hate, specifically by the ADL, Zionist organization. And obviously, like, narrative is something that Zionism requires to continue Zionisming. And I was wondering, like, so with pinkwashing, if one of you want to kind of like give some examples of how you see pinkwashing playing out locally. Obviously, we've heard a little bit about like what happens right here in this very neighborhood in the Castro with the supervisor Raphael Mandelman.
it's gay. Well, people doesn't know that.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah.
He has pronouns.
Yes.
It just so happens like we have 3 out gay guys on our board supervisors who also happen to be the most conservative supervisors somehow. And so my next question was kind of like, how does that happen? How do we end up with the 3 gay guys being the most conservative supervisors? How does pinkwashing show up locally in the Bay?
Well, I kind of have a broader answer to that. That's a good question, the last part of your question. But I think it's not really surprising for any of us who have like been in, for people who are listening to this, I listen to things all the time, so I'm saying it this way. So I'm using air quotes. For people who've been in the gay community, it's not really a surprise that a lot of white gay people are fascists. Like, that's not, that's not surprising. There were lots of gay facts throughout history. Don't erase it, So it's not really surprising to us in a certain way, but I guess if we're taking a more, I don't know if I want to say generous, maybe naive position, and assuming, how could you be gay and a fascist? That's, and a Zionist, which is the same thing, right? How could you do that? I don't think it's that surprising. I think also sort of like the way, San Francisco is like the prime example of a neoliberal city, I think, or like the beacon of a neoliberal city. And one of the things it does, and maybe we'll talk about our horrible mayor, our anti-black mayor in a second, who's also a mega Zionist and took a sister city trip to, I don't know, Haifa or somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere in, to use its fictional name, and it's should get on the same. So I think a lot of San Francisco runs on that kind of neoliberal representational logic, where particularly the memorial of forms of victimhood is used to further kill the people that it's raising up in our name. So like queer people, black people, the Black Panther Party's legacy in the Bay would be a great to a degree if you look over the bridge to Oakley. So I think one of the things that people like Scott Wiener and Mendelman, is there another gay one? There's another gay one, the party gay. The PNP gay. Yeah.
And Jordan.
No, I thought the other one. Yes. Yes. See, you're already forgetting them. It's going to have a plaque on the street soon in a second. So, I think what they do, right, is they kind of like, this is the way fascism/liberalism, which I don't think are different things. I think one's enabling force of the other. This is the way it works, right? It absorbs the weakest version of its critique, and then it uses it to kill the rest of the group that are actually the most targeted. So that could be unhoused queer and trans people, especially black queer and trans people who are on the street. And those are all great examples of people who do that. These are all mega Zionists. They're all super anti-houseless. I think this is a big struggle we should actually connect, especially if we're going to value encampments on college campuses. I think we should look at people who are actually targeted, who live in encampments permanently and don't get to go to a home afterwards. Not to say what college students are doing is very, brave and valuable, but I think that's a really, it's not surprising that they also legislate policies that lead to people living in tents, which I think there's a big parallel between the displacement of Palestinian people. And I think I could go on and on, so I could talk a lot if you remember how the podcast up to date.
I love them saying, I wrote long, that's we're doing the thing.
Yeah. This is where you're supposed to be going.
You apologize when you're gay. You're like, oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been here. I didn't say anything.
No, that's fair. As a native Midwesterner, I'm used to the
You're very polite.
I'm used to it, which is why I'm just like, what are we doing that for? But even speaking of that though, I think for me, how I've seen pink washing here in the city, I'm, like I said, a native Midwesterner. I was living in the Midwest all through my life, through undergrad, grad school, and all that. So this is the first time I'm living outside of the Midwest, here in the Bay. And, I'm going to be general for a bit, because there's significantly more POC, queer, trans people, people from other places, outside the U.S. here in the Bay or in California broadly, more generally, versus what I was used to back home in the Midwest. And because there's so much more stratification within all those different, intersecting groups, I'm more used to, queer and trans people who are oh, we all stick together and huddle together because there's only a handful of us or whatever, versus coming out here to California, to the Bay specifically, and I all the more easily can see oh, it's very believable that just because some people are gay or not straight or not normative in those ways, could absolutely still be okay, I got that going on, but I still want to own everything. I still want to have the most power and money and fuck everyone else, But I'm gay, though. Let me be gay and don't make fun of me for it. I absolutely believe there's people like that. So it's not hard then to see how there's all these fascists who are Zionists and JMO. Like, that's... So, yeah.
I agree with everything you said, but also I want to, one thing to add to this, the way you see it is neutrality, that especially in the queer community across every single part of it, neutrality is something that is pinkwashing and is racist when it comes to a genocide time. And why I'm saying this is because when Charles Hebdo office was attacked, most of the queer people I know, gays, trans, everybody, was saying the Je suis Charlie thing. Or they were, when Paris was attacked, we literally had a Parisian flag on, a French flag on our civic center. With Ukraine, every single queer and trans organization made a statement immediately. It was like a very, very specific thing. And I feel like if you have an unconscious bias where you don't recognize other things as neutral for you, but these things are activating you. So this is a question of racism and an unaddressed unconscious bias. Because sometimes you could be like on purpose racist, like LaVelle Ridley. Like he knows somebody who went to like the best schools in the world. He studied history of the Middle East. That would be saying something like that, understanding that he is supporting a genocide that's being committed. Where you have other people have unconscious bias in the LGBTQ plus community, and I feel like they just need to address that, because the response of neutrality to me is extremely appalling, because this is not the way they respond to other things. And I feel like it goes back to pinkwashing. Neutrality is one of them. And when it comes to neutrality, everything else goes down, which basically most trans organizations, more gay organizations, more queer organizations, completely did not say anything about Palestine. And if they did, it took them 6 months. And then afterwards, they said something where they didn't do that with other situations, starting with, the earthquake in Japan, which was also horrible. That has nothing to do with LGBTQ plus issues. That was something LGBT community stood up for. So that's something also to remember when you're talking to someone when they're like neutral, or they're like, oh, I wish everybody lives okay. That's not the case. You are either have unconscious bias or you're racist. And the other thing is the amount of risk you want to take. And we're not asking for people to risk their lives for Palestine. We're asking people to do a lot of things that could be uncomfortable for them, for an inconvenient, for their own freedoms. Because Zionism controls and runs this country upside down, and you don't have health care because of Zionists. You have police terror because of Zionists. So it's not like a conspiracy theory that Zionists are not behind. We have the biggest AIPAC lobby, is the biggest lobby in this country. So what you're doing now is inconvenient. It's actually inconvenient for your own liberation. So don't tell me, why am I not doing this for other places of being genocided? First of all, you should. Second of all, you're not participating actively in this, and you are actively participating in genociding Palestinians by paying taxes and being part of the system and institutions and voting for somebody like Scott Wiener and Raphael Mendel. You're part of the problem, and you need to recognize this responsibility, whether you're queer or trans or not.
Hello everyone, my name is Tofu, editor of the show, here to tell y'all how you can support the show. If you didn't know, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/SanFrancisco. There you'll find all of our past episodes, show notes, and transcriptions. And if you have the extra cash, you can subscribe for $5 a month. Our subscribers will have early access to episodes a couple days before it goes out to the public. And if you're listening on audio platforms, go ahead and give us a rating. It really helps us out and helps the show be recommended to more people on these platforms. You can also follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube for additional content and updates on the show. And that's basically it. Again, thank you so much to everybody that came out to the live taping. It was really great to see everybody in person for the first time. And I can't thank y'all enough for your support for the show. That's it for me, and now back to the episode.
The next question I had had to do with the being marginalized on multiple axes, and how as we've mentioned, there's a lot of ways that shows up, a lot of ways that people show up in opposition to forces for marginalization. Like I think it was Jemma mentioned how the IOF will send over people to train some of the police forces here in the Bay. Was wondering if you could give us some more insight. We've also heard, names like Mandelman, some more insight in how do we, as marginalized people, identify some of the villains that we should be looking out for, the people who mean Black, trans, Palestinian people harm?
That's a good question. I'm going to answer it in like a more abstract way. There are a lot of people with names we could say. But I didn't want to leave this out too, is that I think another shared context is incarceration too, right? Like disproportionately Black people, I think it's like 30 or at least 30 something percent are likely to see the inside of a prison cell. I'm sure it's higher for Black trans women, we were just called.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so I think that's also another shared point of solidarity between Palestinians, where I think it's like even more, like 30 to 40% of Palestinians in occupied Palestine are likely to or have seen the inside of a prison cell. So I think the shared enemies, and this is hopefully where it goes, because it is very fun to take videos of like a Zionist having a meltdown or something like that. And there was a good one at the other one. Sorry, I happened to have a big connoisseur. But I think it's also helpful to point out enemies as systems and people who uphold systems. I did a very good job talking about the people here who uphold these systems. And so one of them obviously is the system, the carceral system, the prison here, which shares a lot of techniques of deprivation, destruction, how it takes people away from their communities. I also want to say that too, I don't know how long I'm going to talk for, I'll already pre-apologize. It's also it also is a point, I don't want to erase this too, of historically of organizing in Black radical struggle. And I'm a Black anarchist, and I don't know if other people identify as this, but this is, but that, prisons have been a cauldron for, I don't want to say you wouldn't have Black anarchism without prisons, but a lot of the sort of Black anarchists, friends, because we have to talk about friends if we're going to talk about enemies. You have to have friends and you have to have enemies. Also come from being people who are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and obviously the Palestinian resistance, that's even more, maybe even a little more obvious. You don't have to dig as deep to find out, people from Tamimi, who's on your book, to Sinwar, to all these different people who have spent decades, in some cases, in a jail cell, in a Zionist dungeon, it's another way to understand the prisons in the U.S. too, as settler dungeons and Zionist dungeons too, and that function with the same goals of population control, which of course trans people are always going to be on the losing end of population control, will always be on the losing end of democracy. That's the way democracy ends. That's what democracy looks.
So that's very useful to think with, and you're right. I agree with everything you said. Particularly the link to carcerality. It's noticing how these institutions work together. I just showed this memoir I've been reading, which has been part of my way of educating myself and wanting to be, opening my mind to thinking differently and seeing the world differently. Been reading They Called Me a Lioness by Ahed Tamimi, who's a Palestinian youth activist who was incarcerated and has been really involved and active in the fight for liberation and in her village back home in Palestine. And so just noticing things like companies that, for example, companies that work to provide either ammunition or supplies or food or transportation or whatever for dispersing crowds, for example, that's a way that, the carceral system is working alongside, neoliberalism and capitalism and white supremacy to, literally control racialized, people queer, trans, disabled people's bodies, people of color's bodies, both in Palestine and here. So that's another way that, settler colonialism is working against all of us at the same time, but it's always connected. So I think that's just a really apt way of reminding ourselves to ever be expanding how we're thinking about both the villains and also our friends too. So yeah, it works in both ways. And for me, I really enjoy like learning. For me, like I love just learning about all the strategies, like all the tactics that people use, like literally on the ground or online, or how they educate or how they organize. Like it's just I always get so like I'm always just really astounded by like wow, forever oppressed people have like come up with really creative ways to say fuck you, like this is you know get off my land, you know, and knock it off. Yeah. So yeah, I'm always in awe of that, and I think that that's always going to be the thing that draws and attracts people, particularly to the struggle, and like will always be the thing that like continues to like literally give us life. So
I agree on all. One thing I would add to this too is just don't compromise on the social justice principles. Because if you compromise on social justice principles, people that are less fortunate than you will lose their everything that they have. What I mean by that is like when you compromise on like voting for somebody that particularly a Zionist, or voting for a bill that you know that is actually gonna go into like terror, or you don't protest that, or you don't boycott and divest, because I'm losing complete hope in the systems. Fuck voting. For me, sorry, like at least it's a Palestinian, but I'm not turning you off to vote because it's important for other people, but for me as a Palestinian, it's regardless, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, nobody cares about my people, but the community. So what I'm saying is like, don't compromise your values and what you could do, and try your best to do everything you could do, because if you don't do that, others will be impacted on a larger scale. And when it comes down to prisons, this is like, again, Zionism is an extremely homophobic system because it's about breeding and making sure sustaining a specific race or a specific type of people, which means if you're trans, or if you're queer, or if you're somebody who doesn't breed, you are pretty much like not allowed in this community. And this is the truth. Like this is the laws in Israel. Like it doesn't allow gender affirming. It's a very everybody knows in the room. I'm like speaking to the wrong crowd and like try to explain this too much. But what I mean by that is because the system is extremely homophobic and transphobic, that means that incarcerating queer and trans people and like torturing them is kind of a biblical revenge, like really. Like, and if you think about it, how they treat, especially the most vulnerable are trans people in prison, because based on my experience and my friends' experience, they have to be in solitary confinement, even if they don't have to be in prison. They kind of have to go to the big jail because there's no system for them to be like, they're not even thought of in the system. And in addition to sleep deprivation and torture, I want to call out also that right now, I know that we're all focused on Palestine, which is awesome that we're doing this, but one of the things that we need to look at is also prison, like jail support and jail work. In Berkeley, they arrested 12 people. They have asked them for $120,000 bail, and they don't allow somebody that doesn't know you in person to actually bail you. So they have to be in cells until Thursday. I know people that were arrested on the bridge that were sleeping deprived for 36 hours, and were like, the cops would come and like shake the door and make them feel like they're gonna open the door for them to come out. And then when they do, he closed the door again. They did that to people for 36 hours in this country. This is what they do to Palestinians when they torture them. This is the same people. They are trained by the same people. They're training each other. This is what they do to torture Palestinians. They are torturing their own people because they're sending for Palestine. So just remember this. Like, there's people are right now suffering in jail, and we have limited efforts that we could do, but we have a lot of things that we could do. We have a lot of impact. We have limited efforts and limited resources, but we have a huge impact as a community. So I just want to call out jail support, especially for trans folks who are the people being arrested, period.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a shit ton of things that we can do. Jail support is one. I know that we have some people in from the encampment at UCSF in the room as well. there's fortunately many ways that we can all get hooked into the movement going into month 7 or month 8. I guess, one more question before we open it up to Q&A, really short Q&A, would be because, it's been 7 months of genocide. I know that we have people in this room who have been doing solidarity work for decades. So thank you to all of y'all, including people from Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism and Gay Shame. Again, people can check out the zines and stickers that we have in the room. What is one thing for each of you that keeps you going in this struggle?
Well, I spend a lot of time online, and those El Qassam videos are like, oh my God. I remember the video it's true. It's like Thelma Schumacher or something. So I think the resistance in Palestine do take a lot of perhaps romantic solace in it, and I think it's also, I'll relate that to, I think being trans, especially Black trans people, especially Black trans women, people fetishize our victimhood, but they criminalize our resistance. And you can think of C.C. McDonald fighting back with scissors. And I think there is, I don't want to make a total comparison, so that's the same thing as, firing a Yasin 105 at a time. But I think there's a relationship between that and the Palestinian struggle that I see a lot of. I take a lot of inspiration from, because people, especially that answers kind of your earlier pinkwashing question, right? People hyper fetishize the victimhood of official trans people, because the people who live on the street don't get to count as trans or something, right? If they're not whoever Scott Wiener's propping up or the trans district is propping up. So I think seeing people, I think in general, this is a really inspiring moment. I think is another way to say it. It's I never thought. I actually think it's the more taboo word is Palestinian resistance or pro-Palestine than it is gay or queer, especially in San Francisco or trans. Because those have been managed so well, right? Partially it's because we're such a small community, we've been managed so well by people like Scott Wiener or whatever, in name. And so far, because I've always been terrified of the cooptation, so far I haven't really seen, I don't want to say famous last words, but I haven't really seen this be a moment that they've been entirely able to co-opt. And so I think part of that is with a commitment. That is a big commitment, especially I've done other kinds of Black solidarity work for when I was younger, Sudan, and that was very much co-opted by the humanitarian aid industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, where it's people love Black victims, but they hate Black people who stood up and killed their slave master. And they always have and they always will. And so there's a lot I take from that that's very hopeful, seeing Palestinians stand up, whether it's samud or steadfastness or of the people in general, or the actual resistance movement, I think, which is a global, I think, or worldwide. I think that's been really inspiring, because for those of us that have always been victimized and have had our victimhood represented by, again, very carceral systems or logics, and oh, you're so brave, right? What I'm but people who would throw you under the bus, in some cases quite literally, if you fought back. So I think seeing people actually not turn against although the BDS movement did post something recently, seeing people not, the official BDS movement, I think seeing people not turn against, I don't want to use the word right, the need, the necessity, because it's a need, right? We need to resist. It's not, the right is something states pretend to give us, but I think seeing people not turn against that, I really value that. That is very rare. And that's very different from 2020, which we could even talk about 2020. Oh my God. And the George Floyd rebellions. That was very rare, where victimization, and Black Lives Matter, I'll put that up in my window while I close this Black person off the street. Right? That was kind of the San Francisco, which happened, of course. This was the San Francisco cooptation, neoliberal cooptation machine, whatever you want to call it. And I think seeing it so far not not quite happen, at least in the West. It seems that people really pushed against that. And when I say cooptation too, I include like normalization too into that. I think people either pushing against that like they really can. That's my general inspiration.
I think to answer the question, I have two responses. I think one, this is very basic and like what does this mean? But like one is just this is what's right and this is what's correct and this is what's just. I remember like being a college student and speaking of cooptation, like being roped into like very Zionist projects on campus while my undergrad institution was trying to do BDS movement through our student council and all that. And this has been like a really, really useful and like humbling and productive like reflection on that time for me, just like a decade or so ago, whatever, to be like, oh no, this is actually, not even so much the in air quotes like right side of history, whatever, but it's a need. It's just that's what people need for us to stand up for Palestinian liberations, for Black people's liberation, queer people's liberation, and because it's all connected. And then the second thing for me too is that like for me growing up as a Black person, queer person, trans person, like I always felt very disempowered and like unable to like fight back against all the shit that like I could literally see was against me and like knew institutionally and historically was against me, and that's like scary. And like so many of us live those realities, and to know that there's rich histories of people who look like me, who present like me, who like move through the world like me, who have always been able to resist, always been able to come up with some way to like keep moving through the world, which includes Palestinian people and Black people and trans people and all that. Like that for me is like, it's very hard to have hope, but that for me is always something that gives me hope. It's always been the struggle. So
yeah, I really struggled with hope. But I don't struggle with inspiration. I really struggle with hope because a lot of people inspire me. The students inspire me. You all inspire me. The owner of this place, I have a Palestinian flag on the store, inspires me. My husband does. But hope for me is it's difficult. I have a very chronic illness, and when me and my husband tried to figure out our financial future, they gave me 15 years just on him. So that was for me. I was like, okay, so I have a limited amount of time, and I don't think there would be a free Palestine in my life. And I told my partner I don't want to be buried outside of my country. So I told my husband to burn me and become something dirt where he could spread all the places that I love, because I don't want to be buried in a land that is not the land of my people. And it's very hard for me to imagine of a hope of this to happen. But what I have is a duty. It's not hope. I have to keep my family alive. And whatever it takes to keep my people alive, this is what's important to me. I have 35 people. They're the last people holding my father's last name, and I'm his legacy, and I have to protect these people. So that's a duty as a Palestinian, that you have to show up, even if you're so depressed and extremely tired because your people are dying every single fucking day, and this country's killing us. So that's what keeps me living, is a duty for my people. But after the amount of changes of this country's conscience, I have one hope, that I will die. die. I won't die until I see the US aid to Israel stops. And this is where I feel like this is the hope I'm living for. I don't have hope to be buried in a free Palestine, although I should, because I think maybe the generation after me would do that, and I don't know if the fuck my body would give up. But I think that what I would like to do is to dedicate my life to protect my own people and stop hating Israel. And making sure every single person knows that a trans Palestinian person who's disabled, we're not going to be weaponized for the genociding of his own people. And that's what I live for.
Thank you so much for doing this. And I mean, I feel so fortunate to know each of you. Yeah, I mean, what Mama Ganuush said, we need to make this happen in your lifetime. That is something that I am dedicating my time to. And I hope that everyone else out there will do the same. We're definitely going to try to amplify your voice as much as possible. Thank you all so much for letting me do something that I love, which is like talk to people that are way more brilliant than I am. And yeah, I mean, it's fucking depressing for sure, but I'm so inspired by each of you and so happy that to call you friends. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out. I hope that, I don't know, just thank you. Thank you. This was an experiment, and I really appreciate all of y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Sad Francisco, which is produced by Toshio Moronic and edited by Tofu Estolas. If you have it, please throw us a few dollars through patreon.com/sadfrancisco, which will help us pay for podcast hosting, editing, and transcriptions for the show. See you next time in Sad Francisco.